All right, we are officially live. All right, beautiful. Everything looks nice, clear, ready to go. This is all good stuff. So, as we're waiting for people to pop on, I just want to thank everyone who's joined us thus far in the various ImpEx Distillery Deep Dive series. This is the third in our series. The first one, which was on October 18, we had James Wills of Kilhoman. And then just after that, on the Wednesday after that, we had a few people from the Penderyn Distillery. And so we had Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, and then we had Penderyn, which was single malt Welsh whiskey. And I'm really excited to bring on David Keir, who's representing the GlenAllachie Distillery, and the GlenAllachie Distillery is new to the ImpEx portfolio. So this is our Speyside distillery that we're bringing to the U.S. and all those delicious whiskeys. So let me bring on David here. There he is. There's the man, legend.
Joshua, hello, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me and for setting this up and giving me the chat to talk to your viewers about GlenAllachie Distillery.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you, and it's funny. It was this morning we realized, in the UK you moved your clocks back. So I was. The whole time I was thinking, man, this guy's going to be up at 1:30 in the morning his time, but look at this. It's only 12:30 in the morning, so it's almost proper. So.
Absolutely, and it was just when you sent through that email earlier today and said double check your time. I'd been having a conversation with Billy and said, "Oh, Billy, I'll be in a little bit later tomorrow," but thankfully the clocks have moved back, so I'll be starting at 12:30 and not 1:30. And he's like, "Are you sure?" I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure, Billy. And Josh is on the same wavelength as me. And he's like, "All right, maybe want to double check that." So I'm glad we're all here and we're all good to go. And just as well on that, you were mentioning there James from Kilhoman and the fantastic guys from Penderyn. So you've got James, who's posh and lovely and well spoken. You have the Penderyn guys with a lovely Welsh lilt, and then you have me, very Scottish. So if you don't understand anything, don't hesitate to ask me to repeat it. And guys, I've got my headset on to try and make me as clear and as intelligible as possible, but please don't hesitate to ask me to repeat anything.
Well, let me see if I can get something going on here. Can I initiate the translator there? Perfect. I think we should be okay.
Very good.
Yeah. So so far, like I said, we've had Kilhoman Distillery started in 2005 from the ground up, always producing single malt to be just that, single malt, and not go into blends at all. And then the next one, Penderyn, a distillery that started in 2000, and I can't think of any Welsh blend out there. So obviously all of their stuff is going into single malt. However, the GlenAllachie Distillery, which, and I know you'll go into the history, or at least I'll ask you to go into the history, a distillery that started in the later 60s, which was built exclusively for blends and only became a single malt under Billy Walker's watch, under your watch with him. And so I wonder if you could maybe talk about what that means. It's quite different from starting it from scratch. You're bringing an old brand, an old distillery that didn't have a brand, and making a brand out of it.
Absolutely. And there's so many new distilleries coming out now, including the two you just mentioned, which I will say will new, even though they've both been around now for over a decade. But But the single malt distilleries, all the new distilleries are single malts, getting launched as single malts as soon as you can, or as soon as the stock is of age. And then you have someone like us at GlenAllachie Distillery as a 3-year-old company. Now remember, we were formed in October 2017.
Mm-hmm.
We were formed with the acquisition of GlenAllachie Distillery. And as you say, GlenAllachie Distillery was built in the 1960s. It's 1967/68. There's a little bit of ambiguity. If you go to some lintels in the distillery, will say 1967, others will say 1968. Construction was pretty much finished across that winter, but the main thing was the first spirit run was in February 1968. And you're absolutely right. So the distillery's been around for many, many decades, built exclusively to be used in blended Scotch whisky. So it was built by a company called McKinley Macpherson, who at that time owned Tullibardine and I think also Jura Distillery. And this was a spirits arm of Scottish and Newcastle, which was a famous British beer company. So McKinley and Macpherson were the spirits arm, and they were making blends to be used and to be sold alongside the Scottish and Newcastle beers and to be used in the Scottish and Newcastle pubs. So they needed more output, more production. So they commissioned a chap that had designed and built Tullibardine, Jura and Macduff Distillery to go to Speyside, the heart of whisky making country, and find a location that they could find that would be suitable, would have the right amount of water, right quality of water, etc., to build another distillery, which they could add to the portfolio. So that was back in and I'll come back to William Delmy Evans later on, because there's a few interesting design quirks. So that was back in the 1960s. Time goes on. Unfortunately, McKinley and Macpherson themselves were taken over. I think it was by Invergordon, if I got my timeline correctly. Invergordon by White and Mackay. Sure. White and Mackay moved GlenAllachie Distillery across to Campbell Distillers. Now, bear in mind, all through these companies and all these changes, GlenAllachie is still getting used exclusively in blended Scotch whiskies. It's never been bottled as a single malt in its own right. So where they got to Campbell Distillers. Campbell Distillers in turn were acquired by Pernod Ricard, and I think it was around the year 2000. And Campbell Distillers / Pernod Ricard were using GlenAllachie Distillery in their key blends, which would have been Chivas Regal, Royal Salute, White Heather, McNair's, etc. And that was the way it was right up until October 2017, when we bought the distillery and took it back into private ownership and released it as a single malt for the first time in its own right.
Quick question for you on those blends, and you may or may not know the answer to this, but when I think of Jurors, they talk about GlenAllachie being the heart of that blend. When you think about some of the Johnny Walkers, they talk about Cardew being the heart of that blend. Was GlenAllachie specifically a heart for some of these blends, like White Heather or McNair's, or was it just one of many components?
Originally, it was the heart of McKinley's, the blend. And McKinley's, if those of you got a bit of a long memory, McKinley's was the blend that was found under the ice. I think it was a Scott expedition down in the Antarctic, and they found some ice under Shackleton, exactly. Yeah. So that was the Shackleton expedition. The whiskey they actually found was McKinley's, which would have not in 1800s or 1900s whenever Shackleton was there, but that was a McKinley's whiskey that was used. So GlenAllachie initially was getting used in McKinley's. Laterally, towards the end there, it was the heart and it was the home of Cran Campbell, which was a Pernod Ricard brand and was very, very big in France. But it was getting used as the heart and as the home for Clan Campbell. But I'd say it was also getting used as a key component for the other blends. And bear in mind as well, Joshua, blending by its nature involves a lot of whiskey. So it was getting traded and exchanged and swapped with the other whiskey companies So you would have found GlenAllachie in some of the other famous blends as well, not necessarily which were owned by Pernod Ricard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we go on, because I want to talk a little bit about the DNA of the whiskey, which I think played a part into why GlenAllachie would have been used in these distilleries. But I think a good way to highlight the DNA of your spirit is to talk about your 12-year-old, which I've had in my glass, and I've been nosing this whole time, and I've been very, very good about not sipping it, and almost to my own detriment here. But
well, it's now 20-1 in Edinburgh, Josh. So is that an ideal time for a whiskey, or is it too early? I think it's an ideal time.
Yes, that's about right.
So bearing in mind that GlenAllachie was designed and built to be used exclusively in blended Scotch whiskey. Now, if you think of what a blend is predominantly grain whiskey, which is cheaper to produce. It's doesn't need the barley, doesn't need to be malted, doesn't need to be barley, column still, etc. So you're getting high alcohol, but not a lot of flavour. So then you've got something like GlenAllachie getting used by the master blender to flavour or to dress your blended Scotch whiskey. So it was designed from the beginning to be a big, bold spirit for a little of GlenAllachie to go a long way. So you get a full richness, mouthfeel, strong flavours, a distillery character, distillery DNA. For me, and Billy's mentioned this as well, there's always a kind of sweetness, honey, butterscotch, toffee. Sometimes you get a little bit of a biscuity note.
Yeah.
And then if we're actually going to move to the sipping, Solange. My first dram of the night, Joshua. Hence my rush.
All right.
So you get that flavour, those notes that I'm talking about, but sometimes when I try whiskies, I've got my favourites, I've got some I don't like, I'm not so keen on, and sometimes they feel thin, or you think that's a great whiskey, but there's something just maybe not quite there. I think with GlenAllachie, you're getting that body, that richness, the mouthfeel. There's a huge intensity of flavour there. So along with the tasting notes that I was mentioning, I think you get a little bit of mint, or maybe even eucalyptus just comes through on the finish as well. So that's the kind of, to answer your question, distillery DNA, big, bold, lot of flavour, sweetness, honey, butterscotch, toffee notes, and just something coming through in the finish, mint or eucalyptus, something like that.
What I love about the line, and we'll be going through a few different of your age stated. Well, all of your whiskeys are age stated, but we'll be going through more of your whiskeys. And what I really enjoy about all of them, and I think any distillery, this is their aim, but it's quite clear with GlenAllachie that your spirit character just shines through from bottling to bottling, which I imagine would have been incredibly desirable for a blender, right? That consistency of spirit character that you really can't get away from, and that's what blenders want, right? They want that consistency.
Absolutely, they want consistency. Bang for your buck. That when you're adding, you don't need to add a huge amount to get the flavour profile you're looking for. And that was one of the reasons Billy Walker, our managing director and master distiller, that was one of the reasons that he was so keen to secure GlenAllachie, because Billy's been a blender for over 40 years now. So over the decades, he'd actually worked with GlenAllachie, and when he was looking for something new, a new project in 2016, 2017, he went to Pernod Ricard, who he'd also, bear in mind that his previous distilleries, Benriach and Glendronach, etc., were former Pernod Ricard distilleries. He went to them and said, "You've got another distillery in your portfolio," which he knew was great whiskey. because of his years as a blender. He'd worked with it. He knew there was a lot of stock. Now again, and I touched on the beginning of our conversation there, we're only 3 years old as a company, but we've just tried a 12-year-old. You know, Billy knew there was a lot of older age stock. He knew there was a lot of it, a lot of stock around. You know, we bought the distillery at the time, I think it was something like 36,000 casks. Since then, we've been able to keep increasing our stock portfolio by buying more casks back from the other blending companies. And it was a blank canvas, Josh. You know, it'd never been out as a single malt. He wasn't having to try and unpick what someone else had done before. He was able to go with, this is our creation, and this is how we want to do it.
That's amazing. It's amazing on many different levels. And one that I always think about is, you know, this is a man, and you've said this before, this is a man who's now in his 70s.
Did I say that?
Sorry. He was born in the 70s? Shit, did I just put you in a hole there?
Of course, I've said that many times, yes.
But you know, he had just sold off in I want to say 2016.
June 2016 was
right.
Was when it. I think it would have been February 2016. It was announced and then completed, finalized on 1st of June 2016.
So he sells 3 distilleries to Brown-Forman, the owner of Jack Daniel's, and he's likely well off. He's you know, he's nowhere near the end of his life, but he's an older gentleman.
Mm-hmm. We're picking our words carefully here.
I am. I'm trying to be very diplomatic. But, you know, my point is that there was really no reason for Billy to go out and buy a distillery from the standpoint. I imagine he did pretty well after the sale. So what was his drive? Was his drive to put, you know, a final, you know, this is my whiskey, I want to put my name on it, or
I think, well, you're absolutely right. You know, Billy's, he'd achieved it all. He'd made his name and reputation at the distilleries we mentioned. You're right. He sold them to Brown-Forman. There was a reasonable sum of money involved, so he could have retired. He could have perhaps bought himself a small motorboat. Let's not say he'll buy a yacht, but a small motorboat. He could have done it, and he could have retired. Yeah. But why? So why? I'll tell you, Joshua, because he's absolutely obsessed with whiskey. It's what he lives for. When you see him showcasing something he's worked in, when he's bringing down, he brings into the office the pilots, things that he's working on. You know, look at this, look at that. He's literally like a young boy, you know, and he just all he lives for. And I think I've maybe mentioned it to you as well. When he drives up to visit the distillery, you know, it's for us down the Central Belt, it's maybe about a 3-hour drive. Billy is up and out the door 5:30 in the morning so that he is on site arriving at the same time as the production guys. You know, and that's pretty much a sign of his dedication. He just wants to get up to the distillery, talk to the warehouse guys, talk to Richard, our distillery manager, operations director, and see what's going on. So, but he lives and breathes whiskey, Joshua. I think that would be the simplest and easiest way to answer your question.
Oh, that's brilliant. So, okay, so he purchases the distillery from Pernod Ricard, 2017-ish, and this was a distillery that at one time was able to produce around 400 million liters of spirit. However, it's I didn't mean 400 million. I meant 4 million. That's a much better, more sensible number. Lofty goals, right? 400 million. And anyway, so this is a distillery that was able to produce 4 million liters of spirit. However, that was when they were producing malt for blends, and now you've taken it over. As I pour what is going to be the next whiskey, and let me bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the GlenAllachie 18, and then a little bit later, I'd love for you to talk about why we're going from a 12-year-old to an 18-year-old, and you have a 10-year-old in the range, and so on. But so we can talk about that in a little bit. But it seems that you've retooled the distillery from producing maybe not one style of malt, but you've retooled it from having one purpose of single malt for blend to having a new purpose of single malt for single malt's sake. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So GlenAllachie Distillery is a big distillery. It's got capacity to produce. Actually, if we ran it 7 days a week, 24/7 or whatever, we could produce in about 4 million to 4.4 million litres of alcohol per year. Pernod ran it around 3.2 to 3.5 million litres of alcohol, so still a lot of production. When Billy acquired the distillery, first thing he did was slow production down to, for example, this year I think it'll be around 500,000 litres of alcohol. Because now, you're absolutely right, Joshua, now the focus is on just making GlenAllachie known for its quality as a single malt. Some of the blends can do fantastic volumes. Billy's not interested in that. It's all about quality now. And by reducing volume, you can just take a little bit more care and attention with your casks, with your barley, fermentation times, everything now just has, you've more capacity to actually focus on quality, more time. And we've been able to make very many changes at the distillery because of these, because of slowing the capacity down, because of slowing the production. For example, we only produce 4 days a week, Monday to Thursday. Friday's cleaning day. We don't produce at the weekends. Fermentation times, we've massively increased fermentation times to what is now it's about 163 hours, which, to the best of my knowledge, and I may be wrong, but to the best of my knowledge is the longest in Scotland. The industry average is anything between 60 to 80 hours fermentation. So the longer the fermentation should ultimately give us more flavour further down the line. And that's just an example of one of the experiments that we're looking at, that we're carrying out at the distillery. I've got my 18 to hand now.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've been, the noticeable difference off the bat is it's far less punchy and bright. There's a softness and elegance to this one. And I'm getting a focus on just sort of like delicate baked apples in the distance.
Absolutely. That's how I always, as you know, Joshua, by now, I tend to describe whiskey as very simplistic. The 18 for me is just like the 12-year-old, but just that little bit more delicate, that little bit more finesse, similar kind of notes, maybe just a little bit more of that kind of tropical fruits. It's actually interesting. This is the bottle I'm on just now is getting pretty low, so it was a good excuse to draw another one down for for my next session. So good. But yeah, and I just like to compare and contrast some things. Got the 12 in my left here.
Oh, nice.
Been sitting in the glass for a moment or two with the 18-year-old, which I've just poured, and that'll be a fairly oxygenated. That bottle's been open maybe a couple of months, maybe a wee bit longer, and you just start to see the subtle differences coming out. And you're like, I think you're right. You're mentioning apples and so forth. Definitely just getting that bit coming through there, and that interesting. Also the long fermentations, the flavour profiles, the esters should actually take our spirit down that little more of a fruitier direction. that'll be a slightly longer term project, obviously, but perhaps we might see the results of that in a year or two or something like that coming out. So I think we'll try the 18.
And okay, I'll let you concentrate on the flavors.
No, it's fine. Fire on. What was your question?
So the fermentation times went from what to 163?
They would have been around. They would have been around 80 hours at GlenAllachie. They would have been on the industry average because you had the big distillery, but you weren't running it. Even Pernod weren't running it hell for leather. Some distilleries now, are absolutely going full pelt. As we know, there's been a phenomenal increase in single malt sales over the last, I don't know, when did it probably start? 2000, maybe 1999. You just saw it starting to go like that, and then later. So some distilleries have been going absolute hell for leather. Even with Pernod, GlenAllachie wasn't running at full production.
So you're going from 80 hours to 163, and like you'd said, this is somewhat experimental, right? This is new territory for you, and in that fermentation, you're not gaining more alcohol. You're just getting more flavors developed in the fermentation. Because my question to you, and again, you might not know the answer to this, but my question to you is, fast forward 2 to 3 years from now, and if you don't like the outcome, do you dial it back? Do you make some tweaks? What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a very good question. First thing I would say is we ran the distillery for around 6 months before we made any changes, working on the assumption if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it also gave Richard, Philip, and Mike, etc., our production guys, a chance to really get under the skin of the distillery, and Billy as well, to start to see what we could do. And then we started to do little tweaks. And of course, anytime we make a change, we've got examples of spirit to compare it to, and you're also talking people, between Billy, Richard, Philip. I mean, I don't know how many decades of whiskey making experience you've got, Mike there as well. So these guys know what they're doing, and they know when they're getting something awry with the spirit. And different cut points is something they've been experimenting with as well, because everything they all give you slightly different profiles. So we know how it's going. I say we're now 3 years into the distillery, maybe 2.5 since we've been running with the longer fermentation. We can see how it's developing in the cask. We can see the direction of travel. So we are, if something starts to say, or maybe let's dial it back a bit, we can easily do that. We can start to change things back a bit. Bear in mind, with this big distillery running it absolute tick over, the guys have a lot of time to check how things are developing and to make little tweaks and to monitor. They're able to check and look at it all the way through. There's no rush on anything at GlenAllachie.
That's brilliant. Yeah, you guys are in such a lucky position to be in. It really is.
Very fortunate.
So a question from Brian Dvorak came in, which I think is a good one. So since you've tasted the new cask spirit, can you compare the new 3-year-old and new make to what the 12-year-old is tasting like?
I can compare more the new make pre-extension, extended fermentation, to the new make that we're getting now. And we can just see that we're getting a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more. The signs now, Josh. I'm not gonna bullshit here. I drink it and I sell it. Someone like Richard or Billy would be able to explain this in more detail. You can see the characteristics, the same GlenAllachie characteristics here. But what we're looking for by just getting a little bit more flavour into the new make, we can see that developing. Comparing it to the 12-year-old is a little bit more challenging, and see, you can tell the basic underlying quality of the spirit is the same, just slightly different. But even our 12-year-old, since we took on the distillery, has been in a little bit of an evolution. So I'm going to show you. That's a 12-year-old that we're drinking just now. Okay.
Here, I have a bit more. Apparently, I'm a little slower with my bottle than you are, David. I'm not suggesting there's a problem. I'm just pointing out that I've got more liquid.
It's all these tastings you're organising for me, Josh. I'm drinking an awful lot of whiskey at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. So you guys, you're coming on board at GlenAllachie just at the right time where we're launching and getting things going, and you're seeing Billy starting to make his mark in the distillery. You're going to see that happening. You're going to see the whiskey evolving as it's arriving, as we're bottling it and shipping it out to the US. And I'm going to give you, so that 12-year-old I showed you just there, or you were showing your bottle, one of our very, very first bottlings from a few years ago. This is one that just came straight off the line last month, Joshua. And that is the direction of travel that Billy is going to be taking the distillery. Okay, bit more sherry influence. Billy's renowned for from his time at GlenDronach for working with sherry casks. So from that bottling last month, from the very first one, we've had the distillery for 3 years now, rather than kind of 9 months when we did our first bottling. We've bought back more casks, so Billy has a far greater array of selection of casks to choose from. We've got whiskey in casks of Billy's choice for longer. It's just he's getting a chance to make his mark on the distillery. And see, some of the comments I was online today, having a look through social media, and some of the comments from consumers who've been following GlenAllachie since day one are absolutely raving about the latest bottlings, and they're actually trying to hunt down some of the earlier ones as well, so they can do a comparison. So if you see one of the earlier bottles of GlenAllachie, hang on to it for your pension fund. Get it bought and get it in the pension fund, because I think that's going to become a little bit of a collector's item. But I'm kind of rambling a bit, and I'm trying to answer Brian's question here about changes and comparing the new make to the 12. Even to summarise, it's not just a new make that's on an evolutionary journey. Even a maturer whiskey is going to be developing and evolving as well.
That's great. Yeah, seeing that difference in color is really fantastic, and makes sense as well, given where Billy had just come from with GlenDronach, and that all being mostly being sherry cask matured whiskey. Would you say that? I do want to get back to fermentation. We have some questions that have come in, but would you say that sherry cask maturation is Billy's comfort zone?
I would say Billy's comfort zone is any kind of maturation. And what I mean by that is he loves picking up parcels of casks, going out and looking for them. And he always says to us, oh, I beg your pardon, the people that are out there traveling the world, he says, if you're with a distributor that's got a great wine or something, or a port in their portfolio, let's get talking. Let's get a few casks in over and see how they work with our spirit. So he loves working with all sorts of wood, but he does have an appreciation of sherry. He does like to work with PX, or also I think he's maybe got some other bits and ones tucked away there. But he does like working with those and the characteristics that they give to his whiskey.
Okay. So a few questions here on fermentation. This one from Robert Horton. Are you going with the same yeast strand? Did you have to change that when you changed the fermentation time?
We have kept to yeast, but we will be changing it. We will be looking at making a change. And again, it's about, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Kind of changing one thing at a time. If you just suddenly changed everything, you wouldn't know where are you getting. Are you getting your characteristics? You're changing characteristics because it's a different yeast or because of the longer fermentation, you start to put a lot of variables into the mix. So no, we're running with the same yeast, and we are, but we will probably start to do a little bit more experimentation there as well.
Okay. And then another one on fermentation here from Elijah Ammon. Does the long fermentation allow for a wash that's easier to distill? Also, at 163 hours, is that the longest fermentation time at any Scottish distillery?
Does it allow that's easier? I'm not sure if it's easier. I do know at fermentation you need to be very careful you don't get contamination in, particularly when it's such a long period. You know, so 163 hours. Basically, that means anything that we mash, we add the yeast to, and we start fermentation on a Tuesday, for example. We are not going to distill that to the following Tuesday. So that's a week. So having it for a week, you could potentially get contamination. That's where we've got stainless steel washbacks, which, well, they're not as pretty, not as sexy as Oregon Pine or Larch or whatever. They are maintaining consistency. So I would say it's more challenging the fermentation rather than the distillation. And the other second part of the question, to best of my knowledge, 163 hours is the longest. I haven't seen any other longer. I'm sure if I'm wrong, then someone will pop up and correct me at some point. But to best of my knowledge, Joshua, it's the longest in the Scotch whisky industry.
I can't think of any distillery that does it longer than you. And
if you
I
can't
continue
think of
to
any, you know your stuff. So if you can't think of any, I'll take your word of that.
Someone out there is going to prove us both wrong.
Someone next week is going to do a long fermentation just so they can pop up on the internet.
I want to talk about distillation, but I realize there's one bit of the process prior to fermentation that we didn't discuss, and so that's in the mashing. And my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as mashing goes with your waters, most Scotch whiskey distilleries during the mashing process to extract fermentable sugars that they then would put into a washback to create a beer or a wash. So before that, in the mashing process, most distilleries use 3 waters to extract the sugars, but GlenAllachie does 4 waters. And am I correct on that? Is that right?
You are.
And then B, is that something that Billy took with him from Benriach? Because I know Benriach did 4 waters. Or has that been the tradition at GlenAllachie for 4 waters in the mash?
We've got 4 waters, and I even converted the temperatures to Fahrenheit for you guys. Yeah. And the hottest one is 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I had to read that because I would never have remembered the Fahrenheit. No, it's again, to the best of my knowledge, Josh, it is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's always been 4 waters. And I think I touched on William Delmy Evans earlier on. William Delmy Evans, the chap that designed and built GlenAllachie, was a bit of a man ahead of his time. He designed GlenAllachie to be super efficient and energy efficient. We've got horizontal condensers. We have got, and I'll explain what that means in a second. There was no pipes on the distillery originally. No pumps. So you think our water source sits up at the foot of Ben Rinnes, the distillery is down here. By clever engineering, basically Delmy Evans was able to use the flow of gravity to build up the energy needed for the entire whiskey making process. So there was no pumps on site. Horizontal condensers were a part of that to ensure a smooth water flow. So I think the four waters would have came from him, from his idea to to get maximum efficiency and get maximum sugar extracted out of the barley. I was talking to Richard about this, Richard Beer, our operations director, and he told me we've just changed, and I'm going to read here again, we've just changed the mill fractions. So here's one for you whiskey aficionados. I almost said whiskey geeks there. We've actually dropped the fraction of husks just down to around 15% husks, which is very low, but because we've got again, here's this word efficiency, quite an efficient mash tun. That means that we don't get the clog and we can still extract. So normally I think it's around 25% husks. We've actually dropped that down to 15%.
Yeah, I've always had the 70-20-10 number in my head, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got 15, 70, and 15. That's what I got there from Richard. So, whenever it comes to all this technical stuff, I have to. Are you going to ask me about the angle of the line arms?
Oh my gosh, I'm serious. You ready for this? Look at this. I didn't even. Travis Williams just said I didn't even tee him up on this. So you know what? This makes. I need a whiskey after that one.
Gosh, I better start. I'm starting to laugh and I'm starting to fidget. I better not do that.
So we're pouring the 10-year-old cask strength now. I currently have batch 1. I imagine you've got batch 2, unless you're cheating. Maybe you've got batch 3 in your glass.
I've got 2 in my glass, but I have 3 to hand just in case it became one of those nights.
Okay.
Now again, let me move my glass out of the way so I don't knock it over. And here's a little bit of the evolution. There's batch 2, make sure I got the right one, 54.8% alcohol, and there's batch 3, which is just landed in the US, I believe. Actually no, that one I'm getting mixed up. That one will land in batch 3 will land in the US about early December. So you've got batch 1 and batch 2 in the US. Batch 1 was what you were on, Josh, or did you say?
So I'm on batch 1, so 57.1% alcohol.
57.1. I'm in batch 2, which is 54.8. Very similar cask makeup in these ones, Josh, and just a little bit more virgin oak. Billy's used just a little bit more virgin oak on the tin, so you get a little bit more vanilla, a little bit more spice coming through. Let's try it straight, and then I might put a little bit of water in it.
I've always, I've never added water to this one because even at 57.1, I think that there's so much texture to this whiskey. It just envelops your tongue, and the alcohol is not oppressing your taste buds in any way.
Absolutely not. I'm just putting a few drops in. I tend to take just a little bit of water with my whiskey, but it's all individual preference. So yeah, let's just see. Just a little bit more vibrant now in the nose. It's a little bit. It came awake a little bit. And again, it's possibly the power of suggestion because I was talking about vanilla. That's what I got the last time. I can get that coming through loud and clear on the nose.
For me, on batch 1, it's much more malt forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's because of use of second fill or refill casks, or just because of age, and there's a little less cask influence, but it's pronounced and it's quite nice.
I think it's possibly the age, the slightly higher ABV. I mean, this one only kind of really came about, the younger the 10-year-old cask strength, because Billy had been trying younger GlenAllachie not long after we bought the distillery. He'd always been clear about 12, 15 in time, and 18, etc. The 10-year-old cask strength was more just, GlenAllachie drinks incredibly well at a young age, and he was just, we can drink this now, so let's bring it out and let people try and see and try it. And of course, there's a great hankering for the consumer just now for high strength whiskies for cask strength. I saw Sam. Apologies, I saw your note there. November, mid-November, you're expecting batch 3 to land. Batch 3, incidentally, at the World Whisky Awards, so blind whiskey tasting, And the way the World Whisky Awards is, there's regional heats. People from all around the world select whiskies from their category, and they then go through to the final in London. So you've got a heat level and then the final. So GlenAllachie 10-year-old cask strength batch 3 made it through the final. Blind tasting, world-renowned panel, best Speyside single malt, and it was up against some big hitters. So that's a treat you guys have got to look forward to, is batch 3 landing with you in mid-November. I think there's only, off the top of my head, there's only around 400 cases in the US, so not a huge amount of stock coming your way. So one to look out for. And again, if you're still lucky enough to come across batch 1 or 2 on the shelf, I mean, they're gone in the UK now. So snap them up and you can start to compare and contrast. Our whiskey is made for drinking. I know I said earlier on about if you're lucky enough to come across one of the early GlenAllachies, keep it for your pension fund. We make our whiskey for drinking, Joshua.
Yeah, well, Kira heard you loud and clear and wants to know exactly what that bottle is.
So it's 10-year-old cask strength, batch 3. Let me turn this around.
No, the one from earlier. This was
the earlier one. Oh, it's Kira the pension man, is he? Some of the very earlier 12-year-old GlenAllachies, because it was our very first. June, we just bought the distillery. There was no brand awareness. People knew about Billy Walker, but we had to start from scratch, getting the product out there, building distribution. So what I'm saying is, if you're lucky enough to see some of the very first, very early GlenAllachie bottlings, then snap them up. Either for your pension fund or so you've got them to compare, get the corks popped and be able to compare and contrast the evolution of the 12-year-old as time goes on.
Sam had a question here. It says, can we consider batch number 3 cask strength predominantly sherry influenced?
Sam, a great question. You're seeing that sherry impact coming through. It's still got a little bit more spice and vanilla in it compared to the 12 or the 15, but definitely more sherry influence coming through.
There was another question that came in, and we'll touch on it, but knowing you, David, I think we might have to get into our 4th whiskey for me to ask this question. It's a doozy. Let's talk about distillation now. So, so let's paint a little picture. You've got 2 wash stills, 2 spirit stills, very very large stills. But you also have something that I think, I don't know if it's wholly unique to GlenAllachie, but it is definitely unusual within the Scotch whiskey industry, and that's that you have 2 spirit safes.
Yeah. So when you walk into the GlenAllachie still room, you look down, and instead of the traditional 1 spirit safe at the end of the walkway, there's actually 2, and there's 2 receiving tanks, etc. And I touched on our very first production way back in February 1968. They fired up one side of the still house, and they ran that, and it was only in October that they actually fired up the next set and brought them in. And we now produce everything in tandem, but we could potentially, hypothetically, if we wanted to, separate. What did I do with that cork? Separate out the production. You could be, in theory, running a different style of whiskey down the right-hand side than you are on the left. It's quite very, very unusual to have that. And again, I think it's possibly just part of Delmy Evans' efficiency in design and thinking that if something's being replaced or repaired, don't need to shut down the whole distillery. You can keep doing you can do variances. It's interesting. I was talking to, Delmy Evans was the designer and lead builder, but he had a business partner called Lothian Barclay that was involved with him in building all the distilleries. And when we bought GlenAllachie back in October 2017, I was actually able to track down Lothian Barclay's widow. Unfortunately, Lothian Barclay had passed away, as has Delmy Evans. But I was able to speak to his wife, and she told some great stories about the different designs that they'd came up with and changes and tweaks for GlenAllachie, because it was the 4th one they had worked on. She also told an interesting anecdote that they spent 2 years travelling around the Highlands of Scotland looking for the right site. And then she wryly commented she wasn't sure if it was so much to find the right site or to spend 2 years on Scottish and Newcastle's coin, fishing and golfing all around Scotland. And the looking for the right site was a guise, but they were looking for one that basically had the water there and the distillery here, so that Delmy Evans could put his efficiency design into play. And I think, yeah, coming back to your point, Josh, I think this initial split would be part of his thinking about how to make sure the distillery was uber efficient.
It's really cool. It's very interesting, and I'm going to say this before Travis Williams does, who I'm sure is still watching this. He's the biggest Kilchoman fan I know, and I'm surprised he hasn't said this yet. Kilchoman also, now that they've expanded their distillery, have 2 different spirit safes as well.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's possibly again because it's been easier for them to bolt on. I don't know. Yep. I'm sure you guys will know Anthony's rationale for doing it like that. But that's interesting. I didn't know that. I've not been to Kilchoman for, well, I think the last time I was in Islay, when did I leave Bruichladdich? I've not been in Islay for maybe 10 years, something like that. So I must get back over. One of my favourite distilleries as well. Beautiful location out there just next to the beach, and great whiskey as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So, okay, so those are your stills. I definitely want to discuss the horizontal condensers, because that is, again, not necessarily unique to GlenAllachie, but surely unusual. However, Travis Williams brought up the very important question of line arm angles. Let's just in case you forgot it, I'll bring that up again. I'm sure it's there somewhere. There it is. So
that angle.
Is it do they go down, or are they flat? Or are they going up?
Do you know, I can't bloody remember, and considering I was winding you up about this earlier on, I should have checked.
Oh, I thought you'd really done your homework. Yeah, so viewers.
Let me. While we're talking, I'm going to quickly find a picture that.
Yeah, there we go. Well, Dave is looking for that.
No, they do go down slightly. They do go down slightly. Okay. Let me come back to you guys. Yes, Travis, they go down. I don't ask me the angle.
But I think, right, that talks a little bit to some of that mouthfeel that I was talking about. With a line arm that goes down, it allows some of the heavier compounds to just go over, right? If they go up, then you're still basically distilling, right? And so that would make good sense. Horizontal condensers. Actually, before we talk about, if you wouldn't mind, I am pouring some 15-year-old in my glass, which will get us into the maturation part of the conversation, because I've got a lot of questions around that. So we'll charge our glasses with the 15-year-old, and then hopefully you'll teach us about these horizontal condensers, the reasons for them, and what they're doing for your spirit.
On the 15, just before I have a little sip, look at that colour. And we'll come back to the casks there, but that is, I know you want to talk about maturation detail. That is that is Billy's. We'd done this one. What was it? August 2018. So it's a year on from when we brought out the rest of the range that we brought out the 15-year-old. So Billy had far more time to get it, and we just did a few small bottlings initially. But you got PX, Oloroso, punches, and hogsheads driving the flavour profile on this one, which is slightly different from the 12-year-old. So lovely and rich.
And this is finished in Oloroso and PX, right?
Some of it's 100% maturation. Some of it's re-racked. Okay, so some of it will be 100% sherry and borrowed. Some of it will be sherry, which has been re-racked into, Billy re-racks continually, and I know you just said you wanted to talk about maturation. Billy moves whiskey continually, looking to change. I'm going to use the phrase again, that direction of travel, the flavor profile. He works our warehouse guys hard. So it's not unknown for him to take 100% sherry matured and then move it into a different sherry just to give it a different style, a different direction. He does it. He does it all the time. Travis, I'm seeing your comment there, loving the 15. Even this one is going to get a little bit of an evolution. Not quite as much as we're going to see with the 12, but you're going to see the 15-year-old just develop slightly a little bit and changing and just continuing that path, get a little bit richer, a little bit deeper, etc. One of my favourite whiskies at the moment, 10-year-old cask strength, was it for a while. But I think, I don't know, maybe with winter coming up on, I'm maybe more into a sherry maturation phase. I've been drinking I was going to say I'm drinking a lot of 15-year-old. Not a lot, but the 15-year-old becomes my go-to.
Yeah.
So did someone have a question about horizontal condensers, yeah? Was there a point you were asking?
You had brought them up previously.
I brought them up. Yes.
And I think it's important to discuss, for those of us who are watching that are curious about these, anomalies, these curiosities within various Scotch whiskey distilleries. You've got about 16, 17 distilleries of the 130 or so that are using worm tubs, and those that aren't using worm tubs are using shell and tube condensers that are vertical, and this is kind of unusual that the condensers are horizontal rather than vertical, and I was just hoping you could explain why they were installed horizontally rather than vertically.
Absolutely. Well, you think, Joshua, most distilleries at Pit General evolved from farm distilleries. Space was tight, and a vertical condenser keeps the condenser within the footprint of the still, if that makes sense. It's smaller space. And then over time, as the distilleries have evolved and got bigger and changed their stills, etc., again, they'll be using, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why suddenly change? Just leave it as it was. So Delmy Evans come along, building a distillery from scratch. He's already built a few. This is his 4th distillery. This was his efficiency. Okay, remember, there's gravity fed. It meant it used less energy. Instead of trying to get the water to go up and down within the rods inside, it's easier. Obviously, it flows easier on a horizontal. So it was part of his original energy efficiency design. Now, we haven't changed anything, but we potentially could start tweaking the temperature on the condenser. And we think, because it'll be, obviously heat rises, we think you'll be able to keep a more consistent temperature, which, if we were wanting to try and alter the character of the spirit one way or another by raising the condenser temperature or lowering the condenser, we'd be able to keep a more consistent temperature, so it would be a little bit easier to control. But yeah, very unusual. And to best my knowledge, again, there's that phrase, I know Macduff have got them, which is another Delmy Evans design, so it's something he brought over from the 3rd distillery he designed. I think there is another one which his name escapes me that has horizontal condensers, but exceptionally unusual. What's that? Sorry, Joshua?
Knockdhu has a combination of worm tubs and a horizontal condenser, if I'm not mistaken.
See, even that must surely be unusual to have worm tubs and condensers. I mean, my experience, and I've been around many distilleries, but to best my knowledge, it tends to be one or the other. So
I think it's a worm on one and then a condenser on the other.
Interesting. Well, I should go and visit Knockdhu. It's not that far from us. I should pop in one of these days.
So we got some comments here on the 15, and I don't think Brian's wrong here. It's it's going toe to toe with those sherry matured whiskeys that people know and love if they're not familiar with GlenAllachie. And just for me personally, typically speaking, I much prefer whiskeys matured in bourbon casks, and that's not because I'm a lover of bourbon. It's because bourbon casks tend to let that spirit character shine through, not flood the spirit, so it's just all sherry. But like I said earlier on in this conversation, the GlenAllachie spirit character is so strong, and it still shines through even with this heavy sherry cask influence.
Absolutely. Remember, that was one of the reasons it was designed like that. It was designed for the spirit to have power, and it stands up well to different styles of wood. It stands up well to maturation. It doesn't get overpowered by. Yeah, you're right. You can still get the GlenAllachie notes, coming through underneath the raisins and the fruitcake or the sherry influence. You can still get that kind of that honey, that's like that lighter sweetness coming through from the GlenAllachie spirit. So without a doubt, just on your note, your comment you made there, Billy has a vision for GlenAllachie, but we have a lot of casks. So while you'll find perhaps the core range will move down the sherry house route, there will be, think almost of Benriach, there'll be something for everyone. There will be bourbon American oak cast out there. Well, we've done some work with rye cast, for example, which are bring a different thing to the GlenAllachie spirit as well. Real spice and that different kind of sweetness. Port pipes, etc. So don't worry, Joshua. There'll be the core range will be heavily sherry, but we'll absolutely always make sure we've got a whiskey for you there. And see the comments the guys are putting up there about the 15-year-old. Standing up against some of these big famous brands, which are all great whiskies. Watch the next batch of the 15-year-old, which I think some of it will just have landed in the US. We shipped some over, which will have been there. The rest is coming over by sea freight. Just watch this, and you'll see, even in a 15-year-old, you're going to see that flavour and just the balance getting that little bit better. And if you don't believe me, guys, go on to Facebook, if you're old like me, or Instagram if you're young like Joshua. Go on to social media and see what the consumers are saying. Don't take my word for it. Go and see what the consumers are saying. There's one, Sherry Bomb Appreciation Society is one on Facebook. I've seen some outstanding reviews and comments there by consumers, the guys that are actually putting their money over the counter and buying our whiskey. They're the best judge. So go see what they're saying, and that is what's coming your way to the US.
For the for the Uber geeks amongst us, how does one differentiate from a previous batch to the next? Is there a laser code on your bottles?
There is a laser code, and you maybe saw me looking at it. And normally I don't try and encourage this kind of behaviour because we are getting down the route of geekery, but seeing as I'm talking to you, Joshua, look down near the bottom, near the curve, the shoulder there at the bottom, the base, should I say, and you'll see. There's no point in me showing it. You'll not be able to see, but there's a little H code that just gives you of the date it was bottled. So that gives you an idea roughly of what you're drinking. And look, don't go. There'll be a point where we'll have not absolute consistency, but you know what I mean, within reason. This is just something over the next couple of years that you're going to see this subtle and slow evolution coming through on a range.
Beautiful. So a few things going on. I definitely want to make time for a Q&A session. Mm-hmm. And we've got some good questions coming in. Before we do, I thought it would be good to, well, we could talk about one of two things, and I'll let you decide on this. We can discuss McNair's, which I think is important. That's a blend of yours, a blended malt of yours. Yes. But there's also the 25-year-old within your range as well. Mm-hmm. And
why don't we do both very quickly, and then
I like that.
Time for Q&A. How does that sound?
I like that.
So let's do the 25.
Okay, so let me, for those playing at home, there's the 25-year-old. And by the way, David, I think I may be older than you.
Nonsense. You must be the Peter Pan of the whiskey world then, Joshua.
I am. I'm a real boy. Oh no, that's Pinocchio. Never mind. Wrong Disney character. Yeah. So the 25.
So the 25, having come from the 15, which is a big sherry hitter, you know, coming back to 25, you're definitely getting that more delicate coming back through again. Subtlety, a little bit lightness, vanilla. It's just, do you know what I was saying? The 15-year-old was my go-to at the moment. I'm too poor to drink the 25 on a regular basis, but I think just having a nose of this, apple, citrus coming through there. You know, I don't have a great nose for these things, but I know what I like and I know what I don't, and I'm looking forward to this one. And this is one of our earlier bottlings as well. The interesting thing with the 25-year-old too, I should actually point out, 48%, Joshua, 48% on this one.
I wanted to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything else we do is 46 or higher, like the cask strength, because obviously it's unchill filtered. Billy, when he was putting the varying together for the 25, just felt at the higher ABV, it was more balanced. That was a sweet spot. And you think most distillers are trying to make their older stock go further, so they're trying to get the ABV down so they can eke it out. So Billy's not like that. Again, it's coming back to this, driven by his passion for whiskey and what's going in the bottle. 48% was the sweet spot. 48% was where we bottled it. Cheers.
It's stunning, and I think, and I don't know if this is the major contributor, it being a slightly higher ABV, but where the 18-year-old was restrained, maybe a bit elegant and soft, the 25-year-old gets some of that punch back that was in the 12-year-old. And it's a bit more forceful on the nose, which is quite welcome. I really like it. And it's got this almost blueberry bramble, you know, this buttery crust blueberry thing going on, which is so.
It's got a real different layer of fruit. I was trying to put my finger on it. Is it like pomegranate? Is it pineapple? Do you know, like an old tomato? You know, 35 years, something like that. You get a real kind of note through it, and I'm almost picking that up in this one. It's not pineapple. It's not pomegranate.
Is it gooseberry?
Gooseberry, maybe. It's just something new's coming through there.
It's really an absolutely stunning whiskey.
It is excellent. It is absolutely outstanding. You know, I talk all the time about our casks. We've got 35,000. We've now got 50,000, etc. There are gaps in our portfolio, unfortunately. But some of the older stuff, 25 might drop out sooner or later. There'll be a 30-year-old will come in to replace that at some point. So it's one to keep an eye out. If you can get a chance to get a 25 before it, maybe in the years to come it might drop out just for a year or two until the stock portfolio works through and we can bring it back.
Yeah, it's that'll be very, very interesting, and I imagine it's got to be a difficult thing to be juggling, where you know you've had these intermittent slowdowns in production, or perhaps there was a year where there was more demand for, you know, this age spirit or that age spirit. Do you foresee GlenAllachie having to juggle around age statements for a prolonged period of time, or do you see yourselves getting to a comfort zone within the near future?
For the younger stuff, I'm talking 15 young. We're in a perfect comfort zone. 18-year-old, there'll be a little bit of restriction on supply for a year or two. The older stuff, 25 and 30, there'll be a little bit of flux coming and going there. But overall, our stocks are pretty good, Joshua. But there is little gaps here and there. And it's just the way it's worked out. It's maybe been in stocks, maybe been used in Royal Salute, 21-year-old or whatever. And the Chivas have pulled on the GlenAllachie stocks, for example. So there's here and there, there's little gaps in the portfolio. But anything that's 15 years and under, no issues whatsoever. 18 and older, there'll be a little bit of flux here and there, but we're good. And we've got casks going back to the 1970s. We've not many distilleries have got that. So we'll bring in. That's just some of Billy's babies that he's just got his eye on, seeing how they're coming on, and when he thinks it's the right time, we'll bring them out to the market. We kind of work on the philosophy. Our whiskey is for drinking. I mean, we've brought out quite a lot in the range. We've brought out quite a few single casks. At our previous company, Glendronach, fantastic whiskey, worldwide aficionados. But guys trying to get their hands on a bottle were having to be at their laptop, 1, 2, whenever it was getting released in the UK or whatever, they were trying to try and snap up a bottle. It was turning up in auctions massively. We've set out not to do that. We've set out to make our whiskey for drinkers. We don't want it to see it getting turned over in auctions. We made a conscious decision to bring out single casks so that people have no qualms about, if they miss this one, there'll be another one. It's not about, you don't have to go around hunting around an auction site. If you miss that port pipe, there'll be another one along at some point. Drink your whiskey, enjoy it. It's not for collecting and putting into auction houses. Flipping, I believe, is the word. That's what it's not for flipping in auctions.
There you go.
So,
yeah, and actually, what you're talking about falls right into what Fred is talking about here. You're mentioning single casks, and we've just Well, first off, we have 2 29-year-old single sherry casks that are already here in the States, and are available. But we've just selected a port pipe for the U.S., which I think is coming out. Sam may be able
it should be. It's just getting bottled imminently, so we should hopefully get it out to you guys. I'm going to say early December. I'll need to speak with Sam and Helen how they're getting over there. Unfortunately, Joshua, with COVID, everything is stretched and delayed. And even our bottling plant that's doing the single casks is running unrestricted. We have handwritten labels, and the guys in the bottling plant are actually taking the labels home, and they do it at night. They hand number all the labels, and then they go back in and they put them, just because of distancing in the plant, etc. Everything's changed and delayed. So unfortunately, single cast. So we'd have loved them to be in with you just now, but they are on their way. So you've got 2 of the older sherry casks which were handpicked by Billy. I think the last year we brought those, maybe late, was it early 2019, something like that. They were bought and sent over. So some real, Billy, any single cask that we release is handpicked by Billy. Then you've got, those are the ones that's in the market just now. Then you've got the ones coming over, which you guys and some of your customers were looking at. And just, I'm going to let you into a little secret here. When I said to Billy, the guys in the USA, ImpEx have made a real impact, have been great partners. They're looking at some single casks. What have we got that will blow their socks off? So normally it would be me dealing with Sam and would, say, look, here's what we've got. Billy actually had a look and said, here's some good examples of GlenAllachie. Send those over and see what the guys think. So you are already having the selection of cash you were looking at were already picked. It's been pretty varied, and I think there's some maybe going to be landing in some other states as well. So you've got the port pipe for you. Here's a port pipe we did. This was early. When was this one bought? This is one for Ralphie.com, May 2019. So we did 2 casts for Ralphie.com for his 10th anniversary. And that was a port pipe. That was a 700 ml. And we did a 750, which was a sherry. This one, actually, incidentally, I just noticed has been signed by Ralphie
Nice.
from when he visited the distillery. July 2019, Ralphie.com. His handwriting is as tidy as mine. Ralphie's been quite a good supporter of us because he switched on to the fact that we're 46% unchill filtered, doing things a little bit differently. So yeah, but you guys have a port pipe on its way, which I'll be looking forward to seeing the feedback.
Yeah, very, very excited about that. And the color is remarkable. It's as pink as could be, which is very cool to see on a whiskey.
See something about GlenAllachie, Josh, as well, and it seems to really be holding its ABV, which helps it pull out that wood influence and that wood character. I mentioned that. I mean that this port pipe I'm looking at here was bottled at 13 years. It's 59.9%. One of those 29-year-old sherry casks you're talking about, I'm sure, is 61% ABV, which is a really high alcohol for such an old cask. So I think that's maybe to do with our warehousing, the style of them, and our location. But it means that whiskey is really pulling the flavour out of the wood and drawing it into the spirit. And so when you touch on that pink colour of the port pipe, that high ABV is one of the factors.
Yeah, it's a remarkable color, and the whiskey is just, it's fun. Yeah, it's fun. I'm really excited for that. I'm being cognizant of time in general. I'm being cognizant of your time, seeing as it's so late where you are. I'd love to quickly discuss McNair's.
Yep,
and then we've got a few questions that came in, and so if you wouldn't mind going
very
over
quickly on McNair's. Okay, so this is McNair's. McNair's is one of the brands we bought from Pernod Ricard. It was a blended Scotch whisky. We've relaunched it as a blended malt. Okay, so there's no grain whisky in here. It's a marriage of 2 Islay single malts and 2 Speyside single malts. One of the Speysides is, of course, GlenAllachie. Okay, so 2 Islas, 2 Speysides. There's 3 of them. There's one which doesn't have an age statement, but it's about 7 or 8 year old, depending on which batch. There's a 12-year-old and a 21. So Billy's sourced these single malts, brought them back to GlenAllachie, blended them together in his lab, then filled them back into a variety of different casks to let them marry for almost a year. He's kept checking them and he says, that's them ready. So usually it's about a year, just under a year. He then puts the final blend, the final bottling together. Okay. Now, I've got the 21-year-old because I'm being good to myself, Joshua, and I know you are as well. The 21-year-old, so you've got the same 2 Islas and the same 2 Speysides, and we've got older GlenAllachie to add depth and richness. The 21-year-old was incidentally voted world's best blended malt, again in a blind tasting at the World Whisky Awards. On this one, the peat is just very, very subtle. Very subtle, and we did the very, very limited release of the 21-year-old. The one that's out there and most easily accessible is probably the slightly younger one, which is around 7 or 8 years old, and it's 46%. Again, this 21-year-old is 48, and the younger you get that the smoke gets a little bit more vibrant. So the one we're on here tonight, Joshua, the smoke in the nose and on the palate. Just for me, just to get that back, you're getting that fruit and you're getting the depth and the richness. Even I can pick up the GlenAllachie in there, and just that little bit of smoke in the back. As you go down into the younger ones, you get that Islay contributions just a little bit more vibrant, and get a little bit more smoke in it on the younger one, on the no age. But again, you've got those Speysides. This is the art of blending, Joshua. This is the art of making the sum greater than the parts. Blended malt is a difficult, or vatted malt as it used to be called, is it's a challenging category.
Sure.
People immediately think of blends. They immediately think it's inferior to a single malt. It's not. Buy a bottle, not just of ours, but of any blended malt, and taste and see what the blender has put in your glass. He has more when you're working with different distilleries. You get the opportunity to bring new flavors to the mix. I keep using this analogy of Billy, the master blender, as a chef in the kitchen. The more ingredients he has, he doesn't need to use them all, but he can just pull on one here or there to take the flavor in the direction he wants. Lumreek is a fantastic, McNair's is a fantastic whiskey. The younger one, for wanting more of a hit, I don't have any Kilhoman left in the house. I've drank it all. Lumreek, McNair's, the younger one, gives me that peaty, smoky hit right up my nose, but it's balanced. It's balanced out by the depth and the richness of the Speysides. It really is the art of blending. People should go and try it. That's all I can say. Go and try it. The younger one, it'll be the cheapest, obviously. I think is reasonably widely available. Go and buy a bottle off the shelf and compare it to your Islas, compare it to your Speysides, all your whiskies, and you'll see what I'm talking about the art of blending, of making the sum greater than the parts.
I think it's a somewhat fair statement, and I want to be very. I'm selecting my words carefully here. That even your single malts, your 12 year, your 18 year, your 15 year, etc. They are blends in the sense that, yes, it's all malt whiskey from a single distillery, and therefore it's single malt, but you're marrying together whiskey from bourbon casks and sherry casks and virgin oak. And hold on, I've got a cat trying to climb up me here. And it's still that art of the blend, even in a single malt. So you've got Billy Walker putting his thumbprint, putting his stamp on your single malts, but also on the McNair's blended malt as well.
Absolutely. People rave about single casks, and single casks are a great opportunity to see either a classic example of the distillery or an unusual example. And they tend to be perceived as better, for want of a better word, than core range. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily agree. Core range is the art of the blend. You said it yourself. It's the art of the blender. Again, opportunities to bring different nuances into the flavor mix. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think people sometimes forget with core range bottlings of 12, 15, and not just us, that behind the scenes someone is doing blending. There's a blender at every distillery.
Yep, exactly. So first off, thank you for all of this. This has really been wonderful, and I've been saving some questions. Okay, and I mentioned one. I mentioned one question
until the end.
Yeah. This one's going to be a doozy. I had to break out my encyclopedia just to make sure I understood some of these words here. So here's one from Robert Horton, and this is in regards to water. And you may not know the answer to this, but speaking of water, can we also learn a tiny bit about the membrane bioreactor in relation to the wastewater and to your effluents?
I have no idea what he's talking about. Are you talking about the cooling water, Robert? What's your context here? The membrane in relation to the waste water. So obviously, we're redistilling. I can only think when we drain down the mash tun, we cool it, we put it to fermentation. There's no waste there. If you give me a little bit of context there, Robert, and I will try and answer it as best I can. But also, if I can't make up something on the spot, heaven forbid, then one of the guys, Richard or Philip up at Distillery, will answer your question. So look out for it on Facebook or whatever. But a little bit more. Do you know what he means there, Joshua? You're more into these.
I don't. That some of that term in quote that he used was a slightly newer one for me. So I'm going to happily wait for a little more context so we can maybe tackle it together. But there was another question that came in while we're waiting for Robert from Bill Myers.
Oh yeah.
And he wants to know what's the ABV, and he apologized because he's using Siri talk to text here.
No, that's fine. I get the point.
Yeah, I can't believe Siri changed ABV to proof. That's the thing that gets me the most.
Wow, there you go. Speaking American. Great question. We do some a little bit at 63.5. William, just for some reason, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We do some at a higher at 68. And we did a very, very, very small at a slightly higher ABV. But 63.5 and 68. And in years gone by, GlenAllachie must have been filled at a fairly high ABV for us to be bottling it, 29, 30 years later at 60% ABV.
Yeah.
Okay, so 63.5 and 68.
You mentioned too, regarding your warehouses, that you find, typically speaking, your overall angel share is lower than the industry, generally speaking.
Not so much the angel share. Well, it is a little bit of the angel share, but as a rule of thumb, you lose, I think, I can't remember what it is, 2%. A rule of thumb, a cask lying on its side in a warehouse, rule of thumb, 2% per year. And it changes as the years go by. And then the ABV, if you fill it at 68, you lose 1% per year. At GlenAllachie, we've got big warehouses. We've got over 100,000 casks on site. We've got 14 Uber warehouses, which racking is 9 high. So basically what I'm saying is they maintain a constant temperature. They're old. The warehouses that were built years ago before, nowadays a warehouse is thrown up in no time. It's foundations, metal frame, metal shearing, bang, there's your warehouse. This is the old breeze block right up, and then the old asbestos tiles, ceramic roof thing, tiles, whatever the hell you want to call
tiles,
them. So they keep a consistent temperature in there, and we're at the foot of Ben Rinnes. There's a cold wind comes down the valley. It's cold in our warehouses when you go in there. So I think that's one of the reasons that we keep our ABV. We don't get that evaporation of dropping down. There's not this temperature fluctuation, which a lot of distillers like because it helps speed up the maturation process. Everything at GlenAllachie is just that little bit slower, more consistent and steady.
By the way, Robert came in and he says, an enhancement installed in the lower pH balance, right. Copper waste into the environment.
Right. Okay. He's talking about the cooling water. I don't know. I do know GlenAllachie, Robert, had a pioneering system put in to help reduce that, the copper. It was installed the 80s maybe, and it was to filter the copper out. But interestingly, SEPA, the environmenting, there we go, 2009, so I'm saying it is 2009. Incidentally, SEPA have changed environmental guidelines, and they're now, SEPA's the Scottish Environment Protection Agency that monitor all these kind of things. They're actually saying that copper going back is now good. So that's a little bit of a turnaround. I don't know enough about that, Robert, to give you the definitive answer, but we do have some funky kit there which helps to extract the copper from the cooling water. There's a layman's answer. I'll get you a technical answer.
And we got another question from Elijah about the next Ralphie cask.
Oh, the Ralphie casks were one-offs just to commemorate his 10th anniversary. I've known Ralphie for many, many years. We were on the committee at Glasgow Whisky Club. Ralphie, I think, was one of the founders members of Glasgow Whisky Club. And I was, and I'm going back 20 years now. So I've known him for many, many years, and he was following what we're doing at GlenAllachie, try. And Ralphie will never accept samples. He's adamant he's got to go out and buy the bottles. He picked up one of a 12-year-old, I think it was. He actually picked a 12-year-old as his whiskey of the year in 2019. Would it have been 2018? And I emailed and said, "Wow, Ralphie, I'm really impressed. I'm glad you like what we're doing." And he said, "No worries, I'm fantastic." And he said, "Oh, by the way, it's our 10th anniversary." He's been blogging or vlogging, I think is the correct term, for 10 years. So we had a conversation, and we borrowed a couple of casks to commemorate that, and we made a donation to charity as well on behalf of Ralphie.com. So I'm sorry, Elijah, no more Ralphie casks. Well, not in the short term. There's nothing planned. You'll just have to content yourself with Billy's casks and ImpEx casks, and I'm sure they won't let you down.
Speaking of casks, and I don't know if you share this information or not, but I think it's a good question. Darren McInnes wanting to know where you source your sherry cask from.
Miguel, who's within the Jerez triangle, and I think there's other ones at Juan Pino, but mainly Miguel. Billy likes to work with Manuel Miguel, who I think also Glenfarclas get quite a lot of their casks from there also.
Yes, Glenfarclas, Kilhoman also get their casks from Miguel Martin. So that's good. That's sign of quality right there, right? It's and is that who we worked with Glendronach and Benriach as well?
Yeah, there was a bit of a history there going back as well.
That's fantastic.
Billy's relationships with all these people meant that we were able to hit the ground running as soon as we got the distillery. Everything was all keyed up, and we were on the move. Billy doesn't have a lot of patience when it comes to working with whiskey. He wants to get in about it. He doesn't like waiting and things arriving. So we were able to use his connections to all his old suppliers and get wood arriving at the distillery pretty quickly.
Closing question, potentially closing question.
Sure, I'm not going anywhere.
What's the, if you're running a tasting, right? So someone's new to GlenAllachie. What is it you like them to leave with? What is it about GlenAllachie you want them to go, flavor aside, or maybe flavor included, right? But what is it you like them to remember about GlenAllachie?
I think I would like them to understand a little bit about us. Most people that we come across to in a tasting know, well, not most people, a lot of people know very little about single malt per se, or they know the big brands. I would just like them to take away a little bit of our story. We're independent, we're Scottish owned, but everything we do is for quality, Joshua. We do everything for quality, and that's not a cliche. This is Billy's legacy that we're working on now, if that's the word to use. He's got this saying about he doesn't want any consumer to be disappointed by what's in the bottle. And I've heard him say that a few times. We want people that's new to GlenAllachie to try it and go, wow, that's something new. That's the flavor, whether it be the flavors, which from the initial taste, but also just a little bit of our story. 7 people we started with, now we're at 22, I think it is. People forget just how small we are, but we're carving our niche in the world. But the quality of the whiskey, I think, Joshua, would be the abbreviated answer. I want people to try that and remember the quality of the whiskey that was in their glass.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I know I said that was potentially the closing question. However, when Whiskey and Donuts chimes in with a question, we have to put that out there. And I think this is a very good question because it touches on also potentially some of the McNairs that we talked about, maybe for the future at least. So there you go.
Okay. Right. All righty. That's
when are we going to see actually peated GlenAllachie in bottle?
Well, we'd had a little think about that. When it's ready is a short answer. when it's ready, when Billy thinks it's ready. But there is a great interest and a great clamour to see, first of all, the unusual peated GlenAllachie. What's that going to be like? We keep talking about the evolution and trying. People want to try it at a young, see how it evolves over the years. And we were, and then it's a complete contrast to the GlenAllachies are tasting just now. Watch this space, Josh. I think we might do something sooner than planned. We had kind of thought maybe 5 years on from our first period distillation would
Mm.
be an interesting time, because the first period distillation was 2018. But watch this space. I think from what we've been trying, and we've got some and some great wood, some peated GlenAllachie line and great wood, and it's just absolutely, the quality of it is fantastic. It's developing so well, and I think we might bring some out, just let people try it. Well, maybe we'll bring out for ease of and people let people taste it in its natural form. We bring
Mm.
out some single casks just to let them see. Or we might do a small varying. Billy's decision. But watch this space, Joshua. Sooner
That's
perhaps rather
brilliant.
than later.
And you wouldn't shy away at 5 years old. You wouldn't shy away from an age statement. I know you guys don't shy away from age stated,
No.
even younger stuff.
All the GlenAllachie's, everything we distill, we put an age statement on. So yeah, if it's 5 years old or younger, it'll be on there. It'll be on the label. Just something on the peated GlenAllachie. If I can try and explain this and try not confuse people. Whiskey and Donuts, I was mentioned about cleaning, and we just finished doing a run of peated whiskey. Because of the size of the GlenAllachie distillery and because of the amount of tanks and capacity that we have, see when we switch from unpeated to peated whiskey, and of
Mm.
course you're going to have some low wines, etc., which will be, of
Sure.
either or. When we change, if we're changing from unpeated to fully peated, we don't actually take the unpeated low wines away. We'll drain them down, put them in a tank, and do a distillation of heavily peated, then do another distillation of heavily peated, and then we'll actually be able to take our cut of what we're actually going to fill to cask. Then when we're finished with our peated production,
Hmm.
we'll stop, we'll drain it, we'll drain down those heavily peated low wines, take them away, and bring back the unpeated, and then start the process again. So that we normally you would put your semi-peated, if that's the word to use, you would
Yeah.
go in with your peated distillation so that you don't contaminate your non-peated with a hint of
Sure.
smoke. So we actually it is 100% heavily peated, and I think it's 80 ppms that we're distilling with at the moment, and we're doing some work as well.
Wow, that's 80 ppm. That is interesting, and your process, I think, is fantastic. That's a great way of completely segregating the two styles.
Sure. Yeah, Josh, it comes back to, imagine having a distillery that can produce 4 million litres of alcohol, but you're running it like a craft distillery. You're not under cash pressures. You're not under space pressures. You've got all the time in the world to make what you want, when you want, and how you want to do it. Um,
Mm.
and you're going to see that with GlenAllachie. And that's just an example. And we've got other little things up our sleeves with our peats as well, peated whiskey. Significant, tweaking different cuts, taking different bits, etc., etc. Watch this space, guys. Evolution of the GlenAllachie as it stands. You're going to see, and then you're going to see our own peated spirit coming through, and all different. You're going to really see that coming as well. And I saw someone popped up there, a question or a comment that Billy likes to mature. And Billy likes to mature peated in port pipes. Yeah,
Four pipes, yeah.
let's have a bash. Billy, we've no shortage of quality casks. I think this year we spent something like $1.2 million on wood. Just have a think for a company our size, that is phenomenal, and that is part of Billy's dedication. Um, to just making the whiskey, to not disappointing the consumers with what's in their glass. So watch your space with the period whiskies. I think it's tremendously exciting. Joshua, I know you love to get into the geeky side of things. Maybe I'll speak nicely to Billy and we'll get a little sample drawn over and sent specifically for you. I'll put it in a little box, make sure Sam doesn't intercept it on its way. I'd love to hear your feedback and what you thought on it.
The beautiful thing about this is what you said has been recorded. And so I can hold you to this, David. David,
I'll send 2 samples, Josh. I'll send one for Sam as well.
Oh, good. That's smart. That way I can definitely get it. If you only sent the one, there's a good chance that Sam may take it from me. No, he wouldn't do that. He's a good guy. David, thank you so much for staying up and doing this deep dive. Oh, see that? Here, look at this. Sam just said, what? It really has been a brilliant time speaking with you and learning a bit more about GlenAllachie, though unfortunately not necessarily the exact angle of the line arm, but there'll be more conversations for sure. But I'll let you get to sleep. Oh wait, hold on. There might be one more little thing for you here. There you go. Little thing about Billy. I've never been at a Billy Walker presentation, so hopefully one of these days I'll get to that.
Oh, fantastic! Well, he's going to be, Josh. He's going to be on. I think it's November the 12th. I think. Billy's going to be doing a virtual tasting, which is the way of the world these days. He did some experimentation with virgin oak, chinkapin, French, and Spanish. And just to showcase, you were mentioning there about distillery character or wood character, etc. So he did this little thing just to show to people, what he's looking from the casks and the subtle difference in nuances. Do you know what? I don't want to make a promise that I might not be able to keep, but I'll try and get some of these samples over to you guys if I can get myself organized. And even the timing might not work for you at 7 p.m. in the UK, midday for you. Well, that's whiskey drinking time.
That's whiskey drinking time. Yeah.
But you can see a Billy taste and you can hear his thoughts and what he's doing. But I saw the comment that the chap put up there about Billy being a great host. His passion shines through. I think that's all I can say. People will meet him. You can see he's a whiskey man, absolutely through and through. Hopefully you'll get to travel again, or I'll get to travel again and do these things in the flesh, and see you guys at the distillery, and you'll get to do a Billy tasting, Joshua, in the flesh.
Well, what we'll do is, I know we have the links, both the YouTube and Facebook links for that November 12th tasting with the various cask finishes. So, for those that are watching, we'll be sure to post those on various ImpEx social media platforms so people can check that out. I know I'll be tuning in and I will have a glass in hand. I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic, Joshua. Okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much for having me, and for all the Geek Fests out there, Joshua, and I know you've got a whole tranche of questions that you didn't want to embarrass me with. Pop them in the comments. I think they come up on the Facebook thread, and some of the production guys will be delighted to answer to them within reason. I'll put that caveat in, within reason. Thank you all very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll not be going anywhere. The stove's still on behind me. I've got a wee dram or two here to finish, so I'll relax a little bit. Thanks again, Joshua. Very much appreciated for having me.
Cheers. Thank you, David. Have a nice drink and a good night's sleep.
Cheers. Slange.
Cheers. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, for asking questions, for being a part of the conversation, for learning about GlenAllachie, learning from David. What an excellent teacher, educator. The passion is there, and I absolutely love every conversation I have with David. just so everybody's aware, if you've been enjoying this series, we've got a few more, and by a few more, actually, a good handful more events happening between now and mid-December. And I just want to run over the remainder of events for you. So where are we? So a week from today, on November 4, we're going to take a bit of a detour from whiskey, and we're going to dip our toes into rum with Mitch Wilson and Black Tot Rum. So that'll be good fun, because Mitch doesn't just know about the ins and outs of rum production, but the actual history of rum production, the history of how rum got around the world. And so if you have any interest in rum, you will want to be a part of that. He's an absolute amazing speaker, educator. And then the next date is going to veer from the Wednesdays. This will be a Sunday, November 8th. We'll have Tal and Tomer from the Milk and Honey Distillery out of Tel Aviv, Israel, of course. And so we'll learn about single malt Israeli whiskey through them. Tomer being the head distiller, and Tal being the head of international sales. Back to the Wednesdays on November 11th, we'll have Chris Udy here talking about Oishi and Fukano. So those are the two Japanese whiskeys from a rice-based distillate within the ImpEx portfolio. So if you've had any interest in the history of rice distillation in Japan and how these bottlings came about, there's no better person to talk about this than Chris. So I'm excited for that. And then the next two, November 18 and December 2, those are both Wednesdays. We'll have Ollie Chilton for both of them. Ollie Chilton on November 18 will be talking about his he's the master blender for Port Escague, so he'll be talking about how he creates the various Port Escague whiskeys from 110 proof all the way up to the 45-year-old, and then the various sort of special editions in between. On December 2nd, Ollie Chilton is coming back to talk about Single Malts of Scotland. So that's the Whiskey Exchange's independent bottling brand, their first brand that came about in 2003. And in ImpEx, we're excited to start bringing them in now. It's one of my favorite independent bottlers. So just as a whiskey geek, having them within my portfolio has me over the moon. On December 9, again, this is a Wednesday, we're back with Chris Udy, and he will be talking about the Matsui brands. So again, Japanese whiskey, but instead of a rice-based distillate, you have Matsui single malt, Kurayoshi Japanese pure malt, and then Totori Japanese blends. So that'll be very, very interesting, and we'll get a lot of history coming from that as well. And then finally, on Wednesday, December 16th, we will have Jason Johnston Yellen, who is my partner within Single Cask Nation. And I will have the unusual job of interviewing my business partner of 10 years. So that should be good fun. If you're a fan of independent bottling, I know that we will get very transparent and very geeky. So if that's up your alley, then please join that. Thank you all so much for joining. This series has been a pleasure, and it's been great seeing you all join, asking questions, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. So, oh geez, look at this. Hold on, before I say goodbye. Jason is going to I'm going to tell you so many things about you. You don't, oh my gosh. Okay, this is going to be very interesting. So, ladies, gents, have a wonderful evening. Thank you all again for joining. We'll see you a week from today, Wednesday, November 4th, where we're talking with Mitch Wilson of Black Tot Rum. Have a wonderful night. Slange, L'chaim, Prost, all the other cheersy, Kampai. There's another one for you. Good night, everybody.